friends, it's Lael with Lael by Mail. One of the biggest questions that I get when it comes to traveler's notebooks is what happens when you have finished with the traveler's notebook, or if you're in the middle of working with the traveler's notebook and the inside pages start to fall out. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how I handle that. It's something that's perfectly normal that it happens. So how I handle that, and then towards the end, I'll talk about how I store my traveler's notebooks when I'm done with them. So let's jump in and get started. If you are new to my channel here on YouTube, welcome. I have a passion for all things traveler's notebooks. So I've been using traveler's notebooks just about 8 years now, and they're just part of my life. So I use them quite a bit, and here on Saturdays on my YouTube channel, you will find me when I'm not traveling doing free, what I call List With Me Live video sessions. So I work in my traveler's notebooks and I do creative listings. So you can visit my website at laelbymail.com. I've also included a link in the description box of the video down below. So like and subscribe for lots of content related to traveler's notebooks, scrapbooking, mini books, and more. If you are new to traveler's notebooks, I have included a link in the description box of the video down below for a Intro to Traveler's Notebook 101 video that I did a couple of years ago. That video explains what a traveler's notebook is, talks about a couple of different examples, talks about sizing, and then I spend a good amount of time just showing you example after example after example of the many, many different things that you can do with a traveler's notebook. So if traveler's notebooks are new to you, I would suggest running over, visiting that video and getting a feel for traveler's notebooks, and then coming back and getting a really good understanding of the process that I go through, the what's and the whys and the hows, when I am done with the traveler's notebook insert and how I kind of get it ready to put on the shelf. All right, so as we get started, when you're working with a brand new traveler's notebook insert, it often looks like this, right? It is flat. It is blank. Nothing has happened on the inside. So it's very flat and compact, easy to, kind of carry around and things. And all the pages, when this particular one, are stapled. So this is a staple bound insert. Now, as you start working in a traveler's notebook, depending on what you are adding to the traveler's notebook pages or your insert pages, if you're adding stickers and die cuts and things like that, it's inevitable that those pages are going to start to grow, right? The width of that insert is going to start to grow. So here you see a brand new one on the left, and this one is I'm just about done with this one on the right. But inevitably what happens is the more that you add, those little staples can only hold so much, right? And so eventually this will start to happen, that the pages start to separate from the staples. And so I need to fix that, right? When you are done, and I always wait until I'm done for a very specific reason. This happened, I don't know, probably a couple weeks ago or a month ago, but I continue working with it like this. And then when I am done, I will come back and go through the process that I'm about ready to show you. So this one, like I said, I am very close to finishing. I have a couple pages left, so it is still has the cover on it. This guy right here, I've gone one step further, and I have already removed the cover and I have removed the staples. All right, so all of these pages are basically loose. I can pull each of these signatures, if you will, away from the others. So it is loose. That now gives me some flexibility in terms of recovering this and rebinding it. So let's first talk about recovering. The inserts that I use are available on my website, and they have kind of this craft cover, and you can see that that's starting to get a little bit dirty, and that's just normal wear and tear, just even from my work surface. As I am working in this book, that that cover will get a little bit dirty. So that's one of the reasons why I wait until the end to go through the recovering process, because if I recover at the very beginning, then that is also probably going to get a little bit of wear and tear, may get a little bit dirty. So that is one of the reasons why I wait till the end. But the other reason why I wait to the end is primarily so that I can restitch it back together and get all of those pages or all of those signatures included. All right. So like I said, I have already taken the step of pulling out the staples, and I removed that craft cover, and then that craft cover I just throw away. One of the reasons that I like to recover them and I don't use that same cover is because as you are adding more and more to your insert, you will notice that those pages start to pop out a little bit, right? So where some of them towards the beginning and the end, we're still pretty much in the same place as with a brand new insert, but the ones in the center start to pop out. So when I am doing a new cover, I want my cover to be larger than that original cover was, right? I want my cover to be able to, come past the edges of all of those pages to help protect a little bit. So here's an example of that. This is one of my inserts that I have recovered and then stitched. We'll go through that stitching process, but you can see how that cover now protects all of those interior pages. So let's get started with that first. When I am recovering my inserts, I'm always using 12 by 12 pattern paper. So I do that because I need something that is fairly wide, right? The height isn't necessarily in need of the 12, but the width is in need of the 12. So I have pulled out a 12 by 12 piece of pattern paper. As you are looking for pattern paper to recover your insert with, just pay attention to the thickness. Now this is probably your standard size thickness. You don't want to go with something that's a really thin. I wouldn't go with something like vellum or something like that. That's not enough structure to give you over time to really hold that well. Also, the vellum is not going to handle your stitching very well either. So you could use clear acetate. In some cases, I have used clear acetate, a patterned acetate, to recover. But in this case, I'm just using a regular old, standard quality piece of 12 by 12 pattern paper. So the inserts that I use are standard wide. That is 5 inches wide by 8 1/4 inches tall. So as I'm going to trim this paper, I want to make sure that it is about 8 1/4 inches tall, right? I don't want to go shorter than that because then that cover is not going to cover the top and the bottom. So as I cut that, if I'm using a patterned paper, I want to pay attention to the orientation of the pattern before I cut. So clearly this fun Ferris wheel paper has an orientation, right? It is a horizontal or landscape orientation. So if we think about that covering my cover, we want that to be running this way, the direction running this way. So that means I am going to throw it in my trimmer and trim it this way. I want that to be, like I said, about 8 1/4 inches tall. That height is going to vary based on the type of insert that you are using. So if you're using a shorter insert, then you would want to trim your paper accordingly. Same if you're using maybe a taller insert, like maybe an A5 or something like that, you would want that to be a little bit taller. All right, so there we go. There is our paper. I am going to fold my paper in half. And generally what I do when I am folding pattern paper, I will fold with the outside pattern facing in. So outside pattern facing in. The reason I do that is if you are ever going to see any fiber breakage in your paper, if you're ever going to see fiber breakage, your fiber breakage is typically going to occur on the outside fold, right? So in this case, this is the outside and this is just white, so I really wouldn't see it, but I would see fiber breakage right there on the outside fold. So if I fold with the outside facing in, now my fiber breakage is going to occur on the inside, right? So it's any fiber breakage is going to occur here as opposed to here. I just don't want, the fibers to break there. All right, so there we go. That's our first step. I have folded that in half. Now, if I take my insert, this is the deconstructed insert, and I put that center, I guess the spine, if you will, into the center of that paper and fold, I can start to get a feel for how wide I need that to be. Now, you'll notice I did not cut any width. I just cut the height. I did not cut any width. And I always recommend that you don't cut the width until you do this. Do your wrap. Make sure that you have enough width there that it's going to completely cover those ends. So I feel pretty good there. I feel like I have nice width, and I will probably leave it about that wide because that will protect those interior pages. Now, before I do anything, I like to round my corners. So if you take a look again at this insert that I have already covered. My corners are rounded. The reason I do that is because the inserts that I use are rounded. So I like the corners to match. The other thing, if you keep your corners at a 90-degree angle, obviously the chances of those corners kind of getting bent and beat up is going to be a little higher just because you have a 90-degree angle. So I can pull this out again, and I will come in and I am going to just use my little corner rounder. The tools that you'll see me using going forward, the corner rounder and a couple of the tools I will be using to stitch my insert back together, you'll see I have available on my website, and I have linked to those in the description box of the video down below. All right, so let's put that back, and that is looking pretty good so far, right? It's looking pretty good. Now, if I decide once I get that completely covered that it's a little bit too wide, I don't think it will be, but if I think it's a little bit too wide, I could come back and just trim that down later with my trimmer, but I think we're gonna be in a good position there. Okay. So now we've talked about the why. Why do I do this? Why do I why do I replace the cover, and then why do I wait until the end to do that? So next thing we're going to talk about is the how. How do I go about the process of then stitching this back together? All right. So when I am ready to sit down and stitch my Traveler's Notebook insert back together, there are a couple of tools that I use, and the tools I'm showing you I have available on my website at layoutbymail.com. I've linked to them in the description box of the video down below. So what we need something to poke a hole with, and we need something to sew with in terms of both a needle and some kind of thread. So to keep things super basic to start, if I use a craft pick or a paper piercer like that, I could use that to poke my holes in the spine. And then I could use a blunt nose needle, which is what I have here, a blunt nose needle, right? You can see nice and long, but a nice wide tip, which is what I need. I need a wide tip, and then also a really wide eye for me to get my thread in. And then I need thread. So my preferred thread to use when I'm doing this is a waxed thread. I have this little set available on my website, which gives you 6 yards of waxed thread, and then that little blunt nose needle. If you already have your own needle, I also have 6 yards of the wax thread sold separately. So the wax thread to me is very important because number one, it is super strong and sturdy, but having that wax coating on it makes it slide or glide through all of your pages very easily. So the one last thing that I would recommend if you are using something like this, a paper piercer to initially pierce your holes, would be either a piece of foam or a magazine that you could use to poke your holes through. So I will first use the craft pick and then this piece of foam to start my holes, and then I will show you the tool that I use when I'm going through this process, and that is a bookbinding tool. So I have opened up now my deconstructed Traveler's Notebook insert with the cover at the bottom, the new cover at the bottom, and I have opened that to the center. I have set that on top of that piece of foam that I mentioned earlier. So at this point, I can start piercing my pages, and I need to pierce through every single one of those pages, including that new cover. So generally what I recommend if you are using this technique, you do not want to get too close to the top, because if you get too close to the top, there's the chance that that could then tear. So you'd basically lose that top hole. Ultimately, you'd lose that top stitch. So I usually recommend, I don't know, maybe about 1/4 of a third of an inch, from the top. And I would poke that paper piercer or craft pick through a layer, then through the next one, then through the next one. And I am doing this very slowly because each time I'm getting ready to poke through, I'm pulling to the next page to make sure that I am still in the center. I don't really want that to kind of move to the right or left. I'd like to have all of the holes in the center of that, kind of spine, if you will. So that is the first way that I can do that. I will continue through the that top hole, and then we'll go to the next step on another option. All right, so now as an alternative option, if you do not have a foam mat like that, I have swapped that out for a catalog or a magazine. And the nice thing about the catalog or the magazine is that if you open it up towards the center, you have that center area that is indented a little bit, I guess, right? So that I could use that instead of a foam mat if I don't have a foam mat, to have a place for my craft pick in this case, or my paper piercer, to be able to poke through or poke into without hitting my surface. And if I was doing that, I would do the exact same thing again. Now, typically when I am doing my stitches or I'm making the holes for stitches, I'm usually going, I don't know, maybe about an inch apart. So at this point, I could either move down an inch-ish and start with my next hole, or sometimes I will come all the way down to the bottom and, you know, do about 1/3 of an inch from the bottom and do my holes there, and then come to the center and do my holes, and then just kind of keep doing half and half, half and half until I have all of my holes punched. Now, or poked, I guess I should say. So that process is very, it's easy, right? It takes a little bit of time, but there's some guesswork involved in terms of how far apart you are spacing your holes. Unless you get out a ruler and you're measuring and you're marking, and in that case, you're using your craft pick. So it's a little bit of back and forth if you do that. So the next method that I want to show you is actually the tool that I use when I am recovering my inserts. And that is the tool that I will continue through using. I'll continue using through the rest of the process. The tool that I use when I am going through this process is the bookbinding guide from We Are Memory Keepers. So as part of that bookbinding guide, you have a number of different tools within the set. So as we take a look at those, you have this felted pouch that has a snap, so it keeps everything in together. In that little pouch, you have a paper piercer or the craft pick. You have a clamshell package here that has some waxed thread. And then you have two different shaped needles. You have a curved needle and you have a straight needle. Both are blunt nose, similar to the one that I was talking and showing before. So I have never used the curved one. I've so far only used this tool for exactly what I'm doing here. But as you look at the back of the packaging, it shows you there are quite a few different types of stitches that you could do in terms of bookbinding. So you could do all different kinds of bookbinding with a tool like this. And if you decide that if you purchase the tool and you want to learn a little bit more about those different techniques that you could use, there are lots of different videos here on YouTube of people showing you those different stitches. But as you can see here on the packaging, there's a Japanese bound stitch, there's a Coptic stitch. The one that we're going to use is a saddle stitch. And that's where we will stitch the spine. All right, so that is the first part of the tool, the first things that are part of the tool. Then you have the guide. All right, so the guide, you'll see, has two little plastic screws, and when you remove those screws, this piece comes off. You'll see here, you have all of those different holes or templates that are measured evenly apart. So this is what I use in combination with this to make sure that I am getting the spacing of my holes where they need to be so things are even. Now, you'll see this area over here. It looks like a cribbage board, doesn't it? Kind of looks like a cribbage board. So this area over here, you would use if you're doing some different stitches like the Coptic or the Japanese stitch that I showed you on the back of the packaging. But as I mentioned, I have never used those particular stitches. I use this for this particular type of saddle stitch binding. So that is what we will use. So the way that I use this tool I am going to take a few of my pages. So let's say I start with the first two, well, the center two. I'm going to move this off to the side. I will start with 2 at a time, and that's what I'm comfortable with. You may find that you're comfortable with more at a time, maybe just 1 at a time, whatever that may be. So if I take those 2 pages and I line the center up with this little groove, you can see there's kind of a little V there. My pages go right there in that little groove. And I've played with this quite a bit. Well, I've stitched many of mine, and I will show you those later when we're done. But I have found for me that maybe 2 or 3. I wouldn't recommend doing more than 2 or 3 because the pages start to slide around underneath, and then you end up with holes in the pages underneath that are not in the center. So I'm pretty well centered there. I'm going to take that top piece, and I can come in again with those little screws, and I will screw those pieces back on. So the concept behind those screws holding that piece on is so that your pages are not going to move. But like I said, if you have too many pages, then this cannot get really ratcheted down tight if you have too many pages. So your pages here will tend to slide around a little bit. Now, if I wasn't using the tool, as I mentioned, I would now continue the process of just poking the holes, and I can decide how far apart or how close together I want those holes to be. So here's the little craft pick that is part of that bookbinding kit. And I have started my first hole right there, okay? And then I will come to the bottom and I will punch my last hole right there. So let me pull that up a little bit, but I did my first hole there, my last hole there. Now the holes are probably about a 1/2 inch apart, 1/2 inch-ish apart. And if I wanted to, I could punch my holes, poke my holes every 1/2 inch. Now, I don't feel like when I'm stitching mine that they need to be that close together. Typically, I do it about every other hole. So they ended up being about an inch apart. So if I do that top one, then I will come down to this one. Then I will come down to this one. So you can see I'm just skipping every other one. Now, every so often, and again, I just have learned this, I'll lift up to make sure that I'm still in the center. And the way that this tool is designed, remember how it had that little V or valley, makes it very easy for my craft pick to have a place to punch or poke right into. Now, if I wanted, maybe I only do 5 holes, maybe I do 4 holes. It just depends on my personal, my personal preference. All right, so now I have inserted my, my craft pick into the top hole that I had really punched. Just to kind of give it a reference point, I'm going to pull that out again, and I will put this little guide back on top. So as I mentioned, I can then come back in and screw those in again if I'd like, and that I would definitely recommend if you're just getting started. As you're getting feel how to use that tool, you want to make sure that everything is in place and not moving around, and those little screws will help you to do that. So I can continue punching those holes again this way. This is my center, so I want to turn those over, and these are now going on top. You want to make sure you keep all of your pages together, because if you have a spread in your traveler's notebook where the left page should match the right page, you don't want those pages to get out of order. All right, so I'm going to take 2 more here, and I will line them up again. I will place this little guy on top. So now I am going to continue this process for all the rest of my signatures or pages. All right, so now I have finished punching all of my holes, and that is now the top. And I am going to put all of that back together. Now, I always recommend before you start stitching that you double check and make sure that everything is in the right order, because once you have done your stitching, I guess you could tear the stitches out and start over again if you had some of your pages out of order, but I really don't recommend that. So just double check, make sure that all of your pages that are supposed to go together are still going together. Looks like we are still good here going forward, and then you can assume, since they're good going forward, that they would also be good matched up where they needed to be going through the rest of your insert as well. So we are all good. Now we're to the point where we are ready to start our stitching. When it comes to determining the length of your thread, this is a situation where more is better. The reason is you want to make sure that you have plenty to be able to complete your stitching top to bottom, and then potentially bottom to top again, and I will talk about that. You do not want to run out of length in the middle of your thread and then have to tie off and then start again with the second half or whatever you need. So I've made sure that I have a really nice length of thread here. And the reason I'm doing that is because I will not only be going from the top down, I will then come back in and complete that stitch going from the bottom to the top. So what I mean by that, if you look at this example, I started top down, went all the way down, but you can see I have every other stitch is blank, meaning it doesn't have any wax thread. So I just went top to bottom, but I think what I will do on this one is I will finish at the bottom and then come back in every other hole, and then that would complete each of those empty spaces where there is not a stitch. When it comes to tying a knot as we're ready to get started, this is where your wax thread makes it really easy. You're right through. You only want a single strand. So I am not doubling this up and then tying my knot at the bottom. You'll notice I have just a single strand. So if you've ever done any kind of stitching by hand before, that is just kind of there as I am sewing through. That's just holding the thread in place. So I need to knot the thread at the end, and there's a couple ways that you can do that. The way that I do it is I generally just loop that around my finger. You guys, I have blue fingers. I was cleaning up a stamp right before this that I had been using blue ink on, so excuse the blue fingers. And then I just kind of roll that back and forth in my hands until, well, and sometimes the wax thread, you might need a couple more times to do that just because, you know, it's waxy. It may not quite catch like a regular thread would. There we go. So I have a little bit of a knot there, and you want to make sure that you have enough of a knot that it is not going to pull through. So generally what I will do is I will come in and try to knot that one more time. All right, so now I have a double knot there, and that should work for what I need. Now you can decide if you want to start your sewing with the knot on the inside in the center, or if you want that knot to be on the outside or the back. And there's no right or wrong way, that's just personal preference. Generally, I start on the back. So as I do this, I will turn that over, and I take my threaded blunt nose needle, and I will go through the first, just kind of work it around until you get the needle through the pages. So you'll notice I didn't do the entire stack together at one time. I will then maybe grab the next few signatures in the stack and push that through. And then the last set, push that through. And they move around a lot. So you just kind of have to be patient and work through it. And then push through until I get all of those signatures together on the needle. All right, so there we go. You can see my thread is on the back and my needle is in the front. As you're pulling through, pull through gently. You want to make sure that that this part of the thread is pulling through with you as you're pulling the needle, because obviously you don't want, well, you could, unthread the needle. It would be fine. It wouldn't hurt anything. So there we go. I have now stitched that first hole. Now this is a classic staddle stitch. I'm coming back in to my second hole, and I will do the same thing. I will go through a few at a time just to make sure that I am going through all of those holes together, that I'm not creating any new holes, right? There's no need to create any new holes. And sometimes I get a little overzealous and think, oh, I can go through all of them, which is what I just did. And they started moving around on me at the end. So you're probably pretty safe, just maybe 2 or 3 at a time, which is what I am doing here. And it's hard to see, but I am continuing to lift up every several of those pages, those signatures, and making sure that I am going through that initial hole. And there we are. So now we have, and we're pulling that through again to the back. So that is our first stitch. You can see there is my knot on the front, and I'll tidy that up when I'm done. And then there is my stitch. So as you are working, you continually want to come back through and just gently tug on that thread before you go into the next hole. You want to make sure that is nice and taut. So now I'm going to go through the process, and I will speed it up, but I'm going to go through the process. I'm continuing to stitch through each of those remaining holes until I get to the bottom. So I'm starting on the back side again and going through. At this point, I'm stopping, and I saw that I had a little bit of slack in the thread. So you saw I just kind of pulled each of those loops a little bit, each of those stitches, and I am pulling that taut again. So I will continue to do that as I continue to work my way down the rest of those holes. You may have noticed as I was working that I was working with my insert standing up, and that's just personal preference. I find it a lot easier as I am starting to go through the next hole. It is a lot easier for me to just kind of flip the pages a few at a time. I can see that needle is going through each of the pages in the hole that it is supposed to go through. So that would be an option. You could do it standing up like this, or of course you could have it laying down and then, just go through the pages that way. All right, so now I have made my way all the way through doing my saddle stitch back to front, until I hit that last hole. Now I have a choice here. I could either tie that off on the inside and be done with my stitching, and that would look something like this. You'll see there's my little knot right there that I have tied off, and I am every other space or every other hole there is space. So I did not work my way back up to the top again. But if you wanted to do that at this point, you would not tie off your knot. You would come back up to the next hole. So I am going to that next hole right there, and I am going to then work my way back up through. Now sometimes, and as you get towards the bottom, it makes it a little easier. Like I just pushed my needle through there and it went all the way through those pages, no problem. Now I'm on the back side, and on the back side, I will do the same thing. I will come up through that next hole. And when I hit that next hole, that is what is going to complete that space. So now you can see I have, it looks like one continuous stitch, but I have each of those holes in between. And I will now continue that process until I get to the top of the insert. All right, there you have it. I have now made my way all the way back up to the top. And as we look at the front of that again, you can see that I have all of those stitches are now complete. Again, that was optional. You did not have to go back up the top, but just depending on how many stitches you have and how you want that to look, then you can decide if you want to go top to bottom, bottom to top, or what have you. Now at this point, all I'm going to do is knot this, and I want to make sure that I knot it, very well. I don't want that ever to unravel. So I'm going to take my needle and slide that through that top stitch and pull it through, and then pull my needle through again. All right, so that is what is going to give me that knot. And your wax thread may move a little bit around as you're doing this. I mean, this is definitely not well, at least for me, this is definitely not a professional sewing job. I am not a seamstress whatsoever. So it will be, you know, it's homemade, right? It's homemade. I have my little stitch there, and then I can come in. I just did 2 knots, and then I can come in and snip that off. So there we go. And then I can come to the front. If my needle here, or excuse me, if my thread, I left a little bit of extra, so I can now come in and snip that off as well. All right, so there we go. I am completely now recovered. You'll see that now my pages are a little bit wider, right? They're a little bit wider. Sometimes it's hard to tell. You'll notice that these pages aren't sticking out as much as they were when they weren't all bound together. So at this point, I may decide, you know what, I want to trim those down just a tad. If I wanted to do that, I would simply bring in my trimmer, and I am going to open that, and I'm going to slide that, that cover through. And I mean, I don't want to trim much, right? I may just want to trim, I mean, really even just the tiniest amount. So there we go. And I could do that. Now, in that case, I would need to come in again and round those corners. So that just made it a little bit narrower. And if I do it on the back, then I will also want to do the same thing on the front. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Just trim off the tiniest little smidge there. Smidge. I prefer to wait and do that at the end, because you may end up either trimming off too much or not trimming off enough, and then needing to come back and trim again. I mean, there's nothing wrong if you have to come back and trim again. It's more if you find that you trimmed off too much, then it's hard to add it back, isn't it? Although I'm sure we could figure out a way, right? You could put another piece of pattern paper. I guess you could adhere a piece of pattern paper to the top, or, you know, add some little extra there. But all right, friends, there you have it. There is my now completely recovered and restitched insert. And that is now nice and tight, and it is not going to come apart. So there we have it. Next up, I will show you a couple of different ways that you can store your inserts once you are done with them. All right, so now let's talk about how I store my inserts once I have finished them and they are recovered and now ready to kind of be put to bed or put off for safekeeping. I continue to refer back to these quite a bit, just because as I'm teaching here on YouTube, sometimes I will pull them out for reference. So I have them stored, some of mine, I should say, stored in this is a plastic container that sometimes people will purchase to store things in a refrigerator. So I keep mine stored in that. This I have linked in the description box of the video down below. It is the perfect size. As you can see, they fit in that plastic container very well. And that plastic container is nice and sturdy, because this is pretty heavy. That's a lot. It's pretty heavy. So that is one way that you could store your completed inserts. Would be in a plastic container like that. You may put them on a shelf. Incidentally, these plastic containers, for those of you that have the Calyx or the Expedit, the original Expedit units from IKEA, and those you see lots of crafters use. These storage pieces will fit nicely right into the little cubbies of those units. So that's kind of nice too. In fact, you can put 2 in side by side. So that is one way that you could store them. Another way is to actually use a traveler's notebook itself to store some of your finished inserts. Now, I have a lot of completed inserts. I also have a lot of traveler's notebooks. So as I said, I currently keep mine here because I continue to refer back to them. But there are 2 from when I originally started doing lists years and years ago, 7 or just almost 8 years ago, that are in this particular cover. And this cover I had customized. So I ordered online and I picked the color, I picked the size, I picked everything that I need. But those are just 2 inserts. And that is what I use, like I mentioned, that is what I use to store these 2 particular inserts of lists. So that's a rather large one. Depending on how much stuff you are adding to your inserts as you're working on them, they can tend to get pretty thick. So another option, you don't obviously have to purchase a custom cover. Those can tend to be a little bit more expensive, especially if you have one that's handmade leather like that one is. But you could even just bring them into your regular traveler's notebook covers. So in this case, I will just take this guy, put it into the center, the elastic, and there we go. So what I want to be careful though. There we go. All right. So I could put that in here. Now, the only thing about doing that, because this is really, really thick, look what's happened. My cover is sticking out the edge. So I don't store mine that way. These happen to be a standard. These inserts are standard and not standard wide. So that's why they are not sticking out this standard size cover. So just to kind of think about how you want to store them when they are done. But now I've shown you how I store my inserts. Now you could probably use something like a shoebox. Or even those plastic, the hard plastic shoe boxes. But before you buy a lot of those, I'd, maybe test one out to make sure that it will fit. The width will fit before you, buy a bunch of those and then realize that they are not wide enough to hold your inserts. Now that they're all finished and lovely and beautiful and ready to, go on the shelf, because now you're working on the next one. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, please leave a comment on the video and I will be notified and respond. Or you can go to my website at laelbymail.com and click Contact Us. As a quick reminder, I have included links in the description box of the video down below, not only to my website, but I have also included links to the different products that I showed that I used throughout the course of the video as I was working on getting my inserts slip covered. Or excuse me, slip covered. That's normally what I do when I take apart and then sew back together with brand new covers my inserts. If you're new to my channel, like I said, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. When I'm not traveling, I am here on Saturdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we are doing our creative listing together. And as I was putting that together and flipping through, you may have seen some of my lists. So this is what we're doing when we're together on Saturdays. I come up with usually 3 different list topics. This one, for example, was advice to my younger self. And on camera, I chat with the folks that are there, and I put my list together and I talk about why I do certain things or not certain things, or why this particular technique that I did worked, or why it didn't work, or why I wanted to put something there and not something here, and so forth. So I encourage you to join us. If you like and subscribe, when you subscribe and I have new videos, and those are live videos, then you are notified when those videos are scheduled. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.